Hello everyone. In this video we'll learn about compulsory voting, which has been quite a pet project of our Prime Minister. So obviously it started with Gujarat. In 2009, the bill on compulsory voting was first passed by the State Assembly. In April 2010, it was returned for reconsideration by Governor Kamla Beniwal. In March 2011, it was again passed but again disapproved by the Governor. In November 2014, the government approval was obtained from the new Governor, Mr. O.P. Kohli. Okay, if this does happen, but in this the rules under the amended law are however yet to be framed, and the penalty for not voting is still to be notified. Now the key to any rule is what punishment is meted out to the people who violate that rule. Otherwise the rule has no meaning. If it is compulsory voting, what happens to the people who actually don't vote? So those rules are still not framed. And in the earlier discussions with the Law Commission, the Election Commission had actually opposed any move to make the voting compulsory. And another thing is that Beniwal had refused to approve the bill on the grounds that it was an infringement of individual liberty and violated freedom guaranteed under Article 21 of the Constitution. Now, some other criticism. This is just to give you a background of what it was, and we'll get into more detail. One critic said that there can scarcely be a more dastardly onslaught on the fundamental right to silence and the fundamental right to be left alone than this piece of legislation. Both these rights are acknowledged in all liberal democracies as concomitant rights of the right to freedom of speech and expression and the right to life and liberty guaranteed by the Constitution. So what they say is, if I have a freedom to speech, which means I can say whatever I want to, I also have an equivalent right to not speak when I want to not speak. So I have the right to remain silent, and the fact that I am not voting is effectively just exercising that right of being silent. Also, this is notable that the Honorable Supreme Court, in the judgment on Nota, none of the above, had held that in a democracy every citizen has the right to express his opinion, even by expressing no opinion whatsoever. This legislation will not only be dogmatic and dictatorial, but will completely fail the test of constitutional scrutiny. So, just a couple of words on Nota. So, Nota option was introduced, and so on the EVM, apart from the names of all the candidates, there is a button for none of the above. So, a voter, instead of choosing a candidate, can hit on Nota, which would mean that he rejects all the candidates. Now in this, the point is that even if Nota gets the majority, those votes are basically not counted, and the person who gets the majority apart from that will win. But this is more to gauge the mood of the electorate to see what percentage of people actually feel that none of the candidates are suitable. Okay, so Mr. Modi in one of his interviews said that, let us say a hypothetical person applies for requisite permission to build a bungalow, and now when he is asked to prove whether he voted in the previous elections, and it turns out that he did not, and he is not able to provide a valid enough reason for not voting, then as far as the government is concerned, it was left to the imagination of the viewer as to whether the permission would be forthcoming or not. Okay, so now to get into some more details about this, basically compulsory voting. Now this is showing where all do we have compulsory voting currently. So all these colors that you see are countries which have compulsory voting in one way or the other. The most compulsory at 18 years is what probably India will get, is prevalent in Mexico, Peru, Bolivia, Paraguay, Uruguay, Egypt, Congo, Australia, etc. So these are there are very few countries in the world who have gone for compulsory voting. So now arguments in favor of compulsory voting. First of all, there is the philosophical argument, which says it's a civic duty similar to taxation or military service. So it's the duty of every citizen to vote, and hence if we impose compulsory voting, it's actually pretty logical. Secondly, it says that people will engage better in the democracy if they are really made even forcibly to vote, because then they have a stake in the democracy and the country as a whole. And then we have the political argument that if everybody votes, it will accurately reflect the preferences of all, and it will lead to selection of true representatives. Because otherwise, if only 60% of the people of the adult people vote, then it's really not a reflection of the voter as a whole or the country as a whole. Second, the role of money in politics decreases, as buying votes will not be that lucrative. Only if, let us say, you have 1,000 total votes, and let us say that if you have the money to buy, let us say 20 or something, or 30 or whatever number, and if those votes are going to make a difference, only then does it make sense to buy them. But if the number of voters increases so much that you will never be able to purchase as many votes for it to actually make a difference in the result of the election, then it doesn't make any sense for you to buy the votes. So the political argument says that the role of money power and even muscle power would decrease in the elections. Then there's the social argument, which says it prevents disenfranchisement of the socially disadvantaged. So now what happens is in elections, if you see, a lot of times the people with the muscle power or money power actually prevent people from voting. But if so which leads to disenfranchisement of the socially disadvantaged. But if we have a compulsory voting, first of all, doing something like this will become very, very difficult, because then it will become a very cognizable kind of an offense. And secondly, what will happen is that the people who are left behind currently, if all of those do start to vote, then it will be beneficial for them. Also, political parties will be forced to focus on entire populations. Again, it will prevent social exclusion or the social disadvantaged, as we discussed earlier. So now we've recently seen phenomenon like caste-based politics or religion-based politics, where the political parties, instead of focusing on the common problems of all citizens, are focusing on particular religious or caste groups. Because of which, if their government is formed, then the caste groups which are not their traditional voters are they do face repercussions for not being in their so-called voter group. So the social exclusion and the disenfranchisement of people will end if we have compulsory voting, because then the electoral base will be so large that these caste-based or religion-based groups will not be able to survive. What are the cons of compulsory voting? First of all, it does not guarantee civic learning. So just because if somebody is going to vote because he's kind of been forced to go and vote, it doesn't mean that he'll actually learn anything. He might just go and hit any button. So uninformed voters could sway the elections, which means that if disinterested people or who are just not interested or uninformed, who would have otherwise stayed at home but now are forced to go to the polling booth and poll and vote, they would actually might sway elections in case there is a close contest, which maybe will not be that good for a democracy. Then, as we said earlier, forcing to vote is inherently undemocratic. Then another point of view says that voting is a civic right rather than a civic duty. So it says I have the right to vote, but it's not exactly a duty, because if I may or may not choose to exercise that right or that power given to me, that I could choose my representative. If I do not want to do it, it's alright. That's a view. And again, like I mentioned earlier, it violates the freedom of speech. That is, right not to vote is equivalent to right to remain silent, which is part of right to freedom of speech and expression. Now, what can be the possible penalties which can be there in case of compulsory voting does come? So some more acceptable kind of penalties would be community service or monetary fines. But in monetary fines, we need to remember that fixed charges would be inequitable. So if a millionaire doesn't go and vote and he's imposed a fine of ₹100, versus if a person below the party line is also charged ₹100, then it's obviously not fair. And if we come up with a progressive kind of a structure where the poor are charged penalized less and the rich are penalized more, then it will become really very complex and inefficient. So that is the problem with monetary fines. then you can lose the right to vote if you are continuously not voting. This is again something which can be done, which is more realistic, because and if you lose the right to vote, then it will become very difficult for you to retain, let's say, a government service, or avail government services in general. Retain government service means if you have a government job, or avail government services of various things, like in the next point it can be seen. So the government services can be delayed, so the driving license renewed date could be made later, or they can be placed on a lower priority than people who vote. So if it's known that Mr. A doesn't vote, then he will be placed last in the queue after everybody who votes has been taken into account. So obviously the details of these has to be worked out. And also non-voters could work at the next elections, because elections are a holiday, so many people choose to just enjoy the holiday instead of going to vote, because of which the holiday is actually declared. So they could be made to work on the next elections. These are the possible penalties which can be there. Another thing is, instead of making it a you've always heard of something called a carrot and stick approach. So this is a stick. So if you don't do this, then I will hit you with the stick. But what about the carrot? Carrot means incentivizing voters. Instead of basically penalizing them for not voting, you incentivize them to vote. So how can you do that? That is firstly to make it more convenient. So electronic voting for local, similar to the ones like we have for NRIs, which was introduced recently. Similarly, more polling stations. So if people don't have to travel that much, if it's as close to their homes as possible, then the expected result would be that there would be more polling. Also, you can get tax deductions on voting, so that will again incentivize people, saying that we will be eventually saving more money if we vote. So these could be some ways of incentivizing people. So after this, it's up to you whether you go this way or that. After taking into account all these things, you can form your own opinions and decide whether compulsory voting is a good thing, and whether India is ready for a compulsory voting regime or not. Thank you for watching. Hope you liked the video. Comments and suggestions welcome. Thank you.